Okay.
Good morning, everyone, or good day, wherever you happen to be in your part of the world. My name is David Corey, and together with my colleague Kim Cairns, this is the 10th episode in a 15-part series on the 15 EQ competencies of the MHS Model of EQ, which is based on the original work of Dr. Reuven Bar-On. So we're going to talk about problem solving today, and we're going to take a look at and think about problem solving from a couple of different angles. One of the interesting things about problem solving is of the 15 EQ competencies, it is the one that probably most people have the most difficulty in considering it to be an emotional competency. How is problem solving an emotional competency? And there are a couple of different ways to think about this, and we're going to help you to think these through today. I guess the two most basic ways are considering the idea that our brain has these two different systems that work together: the cognitive part of the brain and the emotional part of the brain. And these two parts of the brain, if you want to think about them, you could think about them as the top part of the brain as being the cognitive part, and the bottom part of the brain, that is the limbic system and the temporal lobe, etc., the brain stem, are part of the emotional brain. And those two parts work together always. There's never a time when something is just about cognition, and there's never a time when something is purely emotional. And so those two parts are always working together. And so it's about incorporating and acknowledging what each part has to offer. And so it's about thinking about how cognition impacts on emotion and how emotion impacts on cognition. And so we're going to do that today as well. So Kim, thoughts on problem solving? Turn it over to you for a bit and just get you to say a few words. Go ahead.
Good morning. Good day, everyone. I think that we view problems as something that gets our blood pressure up and our heart rate up a bit. So when we're faced with a challenge at work or in our personal lives, we go to that feeling place right away. We're hearing the news of what it is that we're going to need to solve, and immediately those feelings start to kick in too. So I think it's helpful if we take a look at it as breaking it down into a few steps when we're confronted with a problem. And again, this is dependent on time. There are going to be situations where we're going to have to respond to a problem really quickly. But I think in terms of generating the skills to deal with problems, it can be helpful in breaking it down into a step-by-step kind of process. And so when we look at it from that perspective, I think the first step is to be able to state the case really clearly to ourselves. So to be able to get a real clear picture of exactly what the nature of the problem is, I'd like to pay a little attention to how I'm perceiving some solutions to that problem, but also maintaining a component of what are other people's perspectives going to be, and what are other people's expectations around this problem solving. So fully stating the case as it looks at that point with the knowledge that I have. Once I have a clear picture of that.
Just a minute, Kim. That sounds to me like reality testing. Is that what we're talking about?
I think that's a good point about problem solving, Dave. There's obviously some competencies that are really interlinked here. And you've raised a good point about reality testing. I think the other key components here are self-regard and optimism. So
now, how is self-regard connected there, Kim? Just want to clarify that before we move on.
Well, I think one of the things with self-regard here is knowing in myself that I have faced problems before and I have worked through them. So I have been through that process in my life up to this point. And it's so important for us to acknowledge the skill sets we bring to each new problem. And having faced challenges before, knowing that I've developed some skills in facing those past challenges, and those are still in my tool belt. So they're transferable skills to this new problem that I'm facing right now. So it's incumbent upon me to have some faith in myself to work through that, some belief in my own skills and abilities and capacities. And the reality testing component, of course, is I can have my own thoughts around what the solutions to this problem are, and it's important that everybody else involved in that problem, it's important for me to recognize what some of their perspectives might be too. So that's part of that reality testing. It's also so it's being curious about what other people's perspectives are with regard to the problem. That helps me generate more information to help solve that problem.
Absolutely. So a little bit of empathy, sort of paying attention to how other people may be reacting emotionally to a particular problem.
Yes, yes, indeed. So and I think that often we get into a situation where we think, okay, I have to solve this problem. There's a lot of pressure on people. I need to shine through here, and I need to resolve this problem. So again, when we look at it from more of a modern perspective, the more people I can access to help me solve that problem, probably the more dynamic the solution is going to be.
Interesting. So now we're talking about interpersonal relationship as well. It's like there's all these connections that go out to the other 15 competencies, and that one about feeling like I have to solve it on my own, that's a very traditional notion of leadership, and of course, Kim, we deal with that all the time in organizations all over the world, where people feel like I'm the leader, I have to come up with this decision, I have to solve this problem on my own, and it's almost comical because there are all these brilliant people around and this team of talented folks, and people aren't using them. They're not reaching out. They're not engaging in conversation, dialogue about the problem.
That's right. That's right. So this brings us to step 2 of a kind of 5-step process with regard to problem solving, and that's generating the alternative. So I've stated the case. I have a clear picture of the nature of the problem, and some thoughts around what the outcomes need to be. So then I move into generating the alternatives and trying to take a look at, okay, my initial reaction to it is this. What could be some other perspectives on that? So not only mine, but being curious about what other people's potential solutions are too. So this is the real brainstorming component of problem solving. Not to get too hung up on coming up with a solution immediately, but generating a full picture of possible alternatives.
Right, and this is where emotions, where you can see the emotional brain impacting on the cognitive brain, because if there's stress, if there's pressure, then we have to use our stress tolerance competency to be able to combat that stress so that it doesn't have an undue effect on our cognition. And we also have to look at other potential emotions involved and make sure those don't affect us in a negative way as well. For example, if we're feeling overwhelmed, this really cripples our cognition and really sort of limits our ability to think in a broader way and on a higher level. And so all of that is going on at the same time.
That's right. So there's that very high degree of self-management that's going on. It's being aware of what all of those feelings are that are bubbling up, and how am I going to manage all of that.
And just to flip that around for a second, it's how we think about those emotions. So here is the effect of cognition on emotion now, and it's how do we view what's happening emotionally, and how are we thinking about that? Because that's the difference between taking a confident, that is a healthy self-regard view, and an optimistic view of potential outcomes, to feeling less confident that I'm going to be able to work through this, and more pessimistic about the outcome.
And I think you raise a great point there, Dave. And I think it's in terms of just turning it around in my own mind. The word problem itself can be problematic because it's viewed as something negative. So if we take a look at it as this isn't a problem, this is a challenge. It's an interesting challenge to me. So yes, there are all sorts of nasty things that could potentially happen on my journey with solving this problem, but there are also some great challenges where I can bring my skill sets and the skill sets of those around me to addressing that problem.
Well, Kim, I think you'll agree this really came out recently in a course that we did. Do you remember when we had all the problem-solving stations around the room and we were doing this? And the most sort of interesting response that we got when we debriefed the exercise was that some people loved those brain teasers and those challenges and those puzzles that we had for them, and other people hated them. So
Right.
even before we even talk about problem solving, it's what's our view of various kinds and types of problems. And to be honest, there are a lot of different kinds and types of challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. Some involving people, where there are a lot of emotions involved in the problem itself, and others which almost seem to be emotionless, like solving a
Yes.
Rubik's Cube, for example.
Right. So more of a technical problem. But I
Yes.
think the other important part to keep in mind with that is there are emotional aspects even to technical problems, because it's how I'm thinking about it and what feelings are bubbling up caused by that thinking.
Right, and there's this one we do, Kim, and you'll know which one I'm referring to, where if we just left people, you can see the frustration level rising, right? They're starting to get more and more frustrated. At first it's fun and they're having fun with it, and then as we leave them to struggle with this problem, the frustration level goes up, the stress level goes up, and they just want to quit. So that's where impulse control comes in. And if you don't have impulse control to control the impulse to give up, how are you ever going to solve a difficult technical problem?
Yeah, definitely, Dave. And I think it's that self-talk component through this too. I've never been very good at this type of thing. It's a statement that gets said inside a lot of heads when confronted with problems. I've just never been very good at this. I don't enjoy this. I'm not good at it, and
Right.
And that's been the story of my life.
Yes. By the way, I forgot to mention, we've got the Q&A feature turned on. If you have questions, please, by all means, write those questions down, type those questions in the box and send them in. We'll answer them as they come up. Yeah, so just, you reminded me, Kim, that there are, people have different affinities for different types of problems. And there are some, and again, call them problems, call them challenges, call them, whatever you will, but we are basically problem-solving machines. That's what we were designed to do. That's kind of what we're about in terms of surviving on this planet. We are continually and constantly solving problems. Now, unfortunately, many of us are solving problems in order to gain individually, monetarily or materially, instead of thinking about, okay, so how are we going to solve some of the most pressing problems on the planet? And I saw an interesting article or poster rather that Richard Branson had done, where he says, you want to solve the problems of the world? Here they are, and here are the many different roles that you can play. And I thought it was brilliant. A really nice way of thinking about our role on this planet. And you look at some of the different things, and they are things like HIV and AIDS and maternal health and gender inequality and various issues that plague our very survival as a species.
Yeah, I think you're bang on there, Dave, and I like that notion by Branson. I think what comes to my mind is that old phrase of think globally, act locally. And
Right.
I think what that can do for us is, so many times when we're talking to people about larger issues, climate change, HIV, AIDS, a variety of calamities on the planet, people have a tendency to go to, I can't do anything about this. This just scares me, and I can't do anything to solve. And again, it comes down to individual choices and actions are what leads to the solution of a lot of problems.
Absolutely, and we feel overwhelmed. And again,
Yeah.
there's the emotional part of problem solving is
Yeah.
feeling stressed, feeling overwhelmed, feeling like we just want to put it off. And of
Yeah.
course, the putting it off, and the not dealing with problems and challenges that are ours to address is procrastination. And it's interesting that some of the biggest to problem solving that we know of are all emotional. It doesn't have to do with the technical aspect of the issue. It's all our own emotions around around facing the challenge and feeling like we can do it and that we can deal with our stress in order to do it, etc. And so that's quite fascinating. And I think we ignore emotion in problem solving at our peril. I really think we need to try to find a way to integrate both parts, the cognition and emotion.
Yes. Yes. And I think that the very important part there is knowing that I'm actually in charge of my emotions. Once I'm able to really recognize and be aware of what my emotions are, um, the next step is being really aware that I'm actually in charge. I'm the conductor of those emotions. So it's very important for me to not just get swept away by that wave of emotion. It's about recognizing it, and given the fact that I'm feeling this way, what are going to be some steps for me to take to address that? So
Right.
this is all an important part of problem solving as well. So once we've generated some alternatives, then it's time to come down to evaluate each alternative. And again, we're speaking about a situation where we have some time involved in being able to address a problem. Some of this will happen a lot faster after we get better at these skills, when we're faced with problems that need to be solved immediately. But it's important to just evaluate each alternative and take a look at the potential outcomes of each alternative. And then we get to the point of choosing the best option.
And interestingly, this whole process of valuing, placing value on one thing over another, is an emotional process. We
Mm-hmm.
may have used our best logic and reasoning in arriving at various alternatives, but at its very most basic, problem solving requires this evaluation piece where we actually weigh alternatives and place value on one over the other. And here, I think, is a place where a lot of people overlook what what their emotions are telling them, and they choose an option based on other factors other than maybe how they personally feel about that particular solution.
Yes. It's about being able to, again, carry both things. What are some concrete logical steps to the solution of this problem, and how am I going to feel about each one of those steps?
And trusting your gut feel, right? I mean, you
Yes.
have that feeling, and I think that some of us think that in fact maybe we should kind of overrule that nagging feeling that this is not the right solution or not the right option, and we don't trust our gut to tell us that this is the right option or the incorrect option.
Right. Right. So then once we've chosen the option, it's really important to actually fully choose that. To be very mindful that I'm making a choice here, and I'm actually going to move forward on that choice, or we as a group are going to move forward on that choice. And the important part here, I think, is knowing that we can adjust as we go along too. But we're committed to that. We can make tiny adjustments as we go through with that, but actually really giving that option a full choice, a full engagement, and make the adjustments that we need as we go along.
Absolutely, and here's where we can get bogged down by fear. We
Yes.
can come to a decision. We can say, okay, we've got a great solution here, but fear prevents us from actually implementing and seeing the results of the implementation of a decision. And I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
you've seen it, Kim. I've seen it in organizations where this can happen, and we have to. And people sometimes forget that it's not the absence of fear, which is courage or boldness or initiative. It's actually the managing of fear. It's
Yes.
it's actually being able to move through, acknowledge the fear, and say, hey, I'm concerned as well, but let's think through the maybe the worst case scenario, or look at some of those risks, and thinking that through. And then there's a great book title, you may have heard of this one, Kim. It's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
Yeah.
And it's good advice moving forward.
Well, and when we look at our lives, when I look back on my life, I look at the things that I've been scared to death of and then done. Those have often been very exhilarating, fulfilling times.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so again, it's that self-regard component, right? I've been here before. I've had sweaty palms. Um, I've had some anxiety, and then I've gone ahead and done it anyway. And and it's been a valuable learning experience, no matter what the end result is.
Absolutely. So here's a question. How does flexibility affect problem solving? And it's a great question. And one of the things that we often find, particularly with some of the more senior people that we work with in organizations, is a little bit lower flexibility score. So what does that mean? Well, there is a level of flexibility that allows you to take a stand and stick to a stand, and that's the upside of flexibility, of a little bit lower score in flexibility, is the ability to say, to stick to a decision. Now, where that maybe lack of flexibility may be a hindrance to problem solving, is considering alternatives and options, and really seeing that there are a number of different ways of going about something. So that's how flexibility plays in there. We have to be flexible enough to consider alternatives, and we have to be inflexible enough to be able to, as we just discussed, stick to an implementation and try it out and see how it goes, etc. Thanks for the question.
And I think too, it's just that notion of being curious with myself constantly through this process. And being curious with myself is saying, am I being inflexible in this situation? And what's that leading to? Is this an opportunity to be a bit more flexible?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Kim, how are we doing with respect to looking at the steps that you were reviewing for us?
Well, we're at the implementing your solution at this point, and this is where we get into the adjust as we go along, and committing, right? This is, and you've spoken to it a bit about, don't get hung up on the second guessing at this point. Turn second guessing into assessing where you're at in the process and evaluating whether you're still headed in the right direction or not. But don't be thinking right back to the beginning of, oh my gosh, I made the wrong decision here. It's just, what are the steps that maybe went off course, and how do I need to adjust that course?
Right. Just going back for a moment, one of the other things that prevents people from carrying through the steps that you mentioned through to completion, through to solution, is a high score on impulse control. And it sounds funny, what we know is that impulse control is related to patience. And so if you have a lower score in impulse control, then you might be quick to jump to an easy solution in the problem-solving process, and rather than consider whether you are addressing the root cause. And so you may be more likely to come up with a Band-Aid type solution. And a higher score on impulse control, while at first it sounds good that you're going to really be able to resist the temptation to take action prematurely, this can prevent people from taking action at all. And so we have to guard against that, and we have to, again, at some point, manage the fear and deal with and acknowledge the fear, or that reluctance, and move forward.
Yeah, good point, Dave. And I think it dovetails with what the final step in it is assessing what the outcome is. And this is a very important part. It's, okay, how well did this work out? And really reviewing the steps that I took to address the problem. And what learning am I taking away from this? I think too often it's, okay, thank heavens that one's over. What's the next problem? And I think if we're going to really learn something from our problem solving, it's about really assessing what we did, and how well that worked out, and what new skills have I developed as part of going through this process.
Absolutely, and thank you, Kim, for reviewing the steps that you reviewed. By the way, for those of you who want to further take a look at those steps, they can be found in the orange book, the EQ Edge, 3rd edition, by Stephen Stein and Howard Book. And you can pick that up online. A great book about the 15 competencies that belong to the model of EQ that we use in our work. And in a training session, what we do is we present people with a stepwise method of problem solving, and then look at and talk about how emotions impact cognition and cognition impacts emotion at each step through the process, and help people to understand more about how emotions are involved in problem solving, and problem solving is involved in emotions at every step, so that people can be more effective, so that people can integrate emotions into their problem solving and do that well. Kim, final thoughts in the last couple of minutes that we got here?
Well, I think it's been interesting. Here we are at stage 10 of this process, and we've really started to weave. So, it's been an interesting process for us to break it down into competency by competency. But I think as we're going through the process, we're starting to see the importance of the weaving of these 15 competencies, and so people will probably be seeing that more in our next 5 broadcasts as well. And I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us today.
Absolutely. It's really difficult to talk about any one of our EQ competencies without talking about the others, because as we are fond of saying here at EITC, these are 15 competencies that work together like instruments in an orchestra. And if you're going to make beautiful music, they all have to be working together appropriately for the particular situation and the set of conditions that we're presented with. So
well, and I think too, Dave, just to add there, it's we're all works in progress. This is a process of constantly tuning those instruments. So there's not some plateau that we get to with regard to each competency. It's an ongoing process for all of us.
Absolutely. And so as fellow travelers on the journey, we want to again thank you for joining us, and please stay tuned to our YouTube channel for future episodes. We've got 5 more that we're going to address, and we'll look at those each in turn, and we'll look at next, we'll be looking at reality testing and talk about it. And of course, we'll be tying in other EQ competencies into reality testing and take a look at the role of reality testing in effectiveness in various roles. So we love to hear from you. So please do write us. Let us know what you think of the broadcasts. Ask your questions. We'll be sure to answer all of them either by email or in the comment section of our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we look forward to seeing you on future broadcasts. So goodbye from me, David Corey, based here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and from my colleague, Kim Cairns. Kim, you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye, folks. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join our future broadcasts.
And Kim is coming to you from beautiful Victoria, British Columbia, on the west coast of Canada. So we'll see you soon. And again, thanks for joining us. Bye for now.